This is Brent with Lykins Motorsports. I'm sitting on a stool between, or I guess in front of, or behind, two small block Ford engines. I know that I've said in the past that it seems like these engine families come in groups, and once this one leaves, then I've got to knock out a handful of FEs. But they kind of come in families. But I wanted to do a kind of a post-dyno overlook of our 302 tunnel port. There was just a whole lot of comments. This engine was posted on several different social media platforms. I know that Drew posted it on his Facebook account, and I had it on YouTube and Instagram and a couple other things. And you know, I was kind of surprised at some of the well, I guess since it's the internet, I'm not really surprised. People kind of don't care what they say on the internet, but I was just kind of a little bit shocked at some of the comments. So I just wanted to do just a post-dyno analysis and go over some of the points that people were making. Before we do that, though, let me say that there was, in response to the Guess the Horsepower video of our 302 tunnel port, there were 113 guesses. And this engine did make 386 horsepower at 6,600 RPM. And what I usually do when I do these videos is that I go with the closest guesser without going over. And there was lots of close guesses, but two guys had nailed it right on the head. Nova 467 Spanker. I don't know what he's spanking. I guess spanking Novas. But he guessed 386. And David Woolard also, he said about 386, but since he stuck the number in there, I'll give him credit for it. So some pretty close guessers. So let's go over some points of this engine. First, let me reiterate to everybody on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube, there are two different types of 302 tunnel port heads. This is the street head. This is meant for street vehicles. This is not the same cylinder head that everybody says, you know, they were going to 9,000 RPM and, you know, they were burning the bottom end out of the engines because they were trying to keep up with the cylinder heads. This is a street head. This had a 1.950 intake valve and a 1.500 exhaust valve. So small head. The chamber shape and design was completely different because there was no room whatsoever to put a larger set of valves in there. I had originally ordered a set of 2-inch Ferrea valves, for the intake side, and there was just no room to stick it in there. So we had to do a lot of custom valve work and to get a good set of valves to fit in there. So street head, rocker, studs, not shaft rockers, smaller valves, you know, aimed for, these do not oil. On the race head, the rockers are oiled through a passage, kind of like an FE. So the blocks were specific for the race head. They oiled through a cam bearing passage up through the head, through the shaft. These just oiled through the push rods. There was nothing special about it. You could have literally bought a set of these heads and an intake over the counter, slapped them on a 302 block and ran. But street head. So for 1968, this head flowing 250 CFM was awesome, okay? And, you know, a lot of guys are saying, well, why didn't you just put AFRs on it. You know, this is a waste. This is ridiculous. You know, I need to cry. So, believe it or not, some people want engines that are factory appearing, vintage, you know, from the 60s. Not everybody wants to put AFR and trick full of heads on engines, but, you know, back in 1968, when the majority of cylinder heads were flowing, you know, 160, 170 CFM, these were, you know, 80, 90 CFM over those. You know, this is a big deal. So, and you know, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to take up for it and justify this, but I'm just saying, you know, don't knock it completely. So if we compare this engine to Mr. Norrie's 289 that we did several weeks ago, let's just make some comparisons. You know, his engine was a 60 over 289, so it was 297 cubic inches. His heads were around the 170, 180 CFM range, and the intake lobe on his cam was 227. Okay, so his engine peaked at around 6,200 RPM. We look at this engine, 312 cubic inches, 250 CFM heads. The cam is only 221 on the intake lobe at 50,000 duration, but yet it peaked at 6,600 RPM. So we have an engine that's 15 cubic inches bigger. We've got a cam that's 6 degrees of 50,000 duration smaller, and it peaked 400 RPM higher. So that's a testament to how well these cylinder heads worked. So the next question, you know, could we have made more power? Of course we could. But this engine has, from the get-go, always been built with the purpose of being a street engine. It's going to go in a street car, and it's going to be driven on the street. It's pump gas. We didn't want an 8,000 or 9,000 RPM engine. That would not be beneficial for the street. You know, we have the race engine coming up that we're going to use a World Products block. We're going to use a Bryant crank. We've got Dyer's rods. It's going to be dry sump. We're going to use the race version of these heads. We're going to have an intake made for it. Then we'll be able to pull some RPM, and then we'll be able to see, you know, what these heads will really do. But this engine all along has been designed for the goal of a street vehicle. So could we have stuck a solid roller cam in it and spun it to 9,000? Well, of course we could. You know, I wouldn't do that with a stud mounted rocker. I'd put shaft rockers on it. We need more compression. You know, there's a Pandora's box with every engine build, and you have to know where to stop, or you end up going down a rabbit hole. So, next question, are aftermarket heads better? Well, duh, they are. There's 50 years, roughly, between this cylinder head and, you know, a head that you buy today from AFR or TrickFlow or whomever. You know, an AFR 185cc head flows 290 CFM at 600 lift. This head flows 250 at 600 lift. Is an AFR head going to be better? Well, of course it is. Could I take this engine and put an AFR head on it and make more horsepower? Well, of course I could. Here's the testament right here. This little 311 AFR 185cc heads. You know, even though it's got a well, the compression ratio is not too far off from this engine, but this has got a pretty stout solid roller cam in it. 530 horsepower. You know, really the only difference is the cylinder heads. So, you know, for everybody screaming, oh yeah, an AFR would have done better. Well, of course it would. You know, this is 2022. This engine is from 1968. You know, thank you for stating the obvious. But again, post dyno analysis, this little engine did exactly what we wanted it to do. And it had a decent amount of bottom end. It wasn't cranky or wild, you know, down on the bottom end. It had plenty of torque at, you know, 3,000 RPM or so. No reversion. So, you know, it'll do exactly what it was designed to do, and, you know, push a street car down the road. So I hope that addresses some of the banter that's being tossed about. You know, I feel like everybody was down on the heads that that this engine has, and it's kind of unwarranted. This is a very rare and exotic piece of Ford nostalgia. You don't see tonal port heads and tonal port intakes. Before, you know, 6, 7, 8 months ago, whenever these came in, I had never seen a set before. So this is very rare, and to see this little guy crank out, you know, 386 horsepower, you know, that is more than a 428 Cobra Jet, and it's knocking on, you know, what a 427 would have done back in the day. So just going over some of the things that I've been reading. All right, guys, thank you for tuning in. As always, I guess my stool turned into a soapbox, but sometimes that's necessary. But we're going to get a crate built for this guy this week. It's going to go home to Mr. Mark, and he's going to find a vehicle to put it in. And again, thanks for watching. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet. Hit that thumbs up, and let's talk about some of the engines that we have coming through the shop real quick. So I've got a handful of FEs coming. First one that I'll probably be working on is the 496 FE with a centrifugal supercharger. I don't know if we'll dyno it with the supercharger on it. I'm kind of leaning towards not. Just from the fact that the customer doesn't want to deal with a blow-through carburetor, as he's going to be driving to a lot of different shows and everything, and changing a lot of altitude, and fuel injection may just be the best scenario for him. But we will put the engine together naturally aspirated and get it on the dyno, so you'll get to see that. I've got what else have I got? I've got my 397 tunnel port dyno mule that the cylinder heads and the intake manifold are coming back from Mr. Joe Crane as we speak. There's two things that we're going to be using in that engine that you're going to not want to miss. Stuff that you've never seen before. And I'm excited about it, and I'm excited to show it to you, but I'm not going to play my hand just yet. I want to hold off a little bit on that. Let's see, I've got Mr. Mark's race tonal port coming. Still waiting on some things to come in for our 470 cubic inch cleaver with the sheet metal intake. I've got several of 496 cubic inch FEs that are going to use J. Brown's new cylinder heads and intake packages. I've got, I think, 3 or 4 other trick flow headed 496 and 511 cubic inch FEs. So I've got a lot of stuff coming that you won't want to miss out on, and some pretty exotic stuff and some new stuff that you haven't seen before. So hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss out. All right, guys, have a good weekend, and I'll see you soon.